questions thinking, what is God going to do? Our nation is destroyed. We're never going to be the Israel that we were when King Solomon was king, when King David was king. They're not that nation anymore. They're destroyed. They're ruined. And that they are a discouraged people. But this is where the consolation from Isaiah comes in. And I want us to look at verse 21 again, because that's our key verse. This is the title of the message here. Let's read it one more time. It says, "Have ye not known? Have ye not heard? Hath it not been told you from the beginning? Have ye not understood from the foundations of the earth?" Now, that's a pretty big title for a passage or for a message. So I've kind of condensed those 4 big questions that Isaiah asks. And the title of my message tonight is, "Oh, you didn't know?" And so often we need to be reminded about that, because Isaiah pretty much is asking the Israelites that you didn't know that God is still here. He never left you. He never will. You see, the Israelites were living their lives as God was nowhere to be found. Our village is destroyed. Our temple is destroyed. We've been in captivity. We've come back. We've been in captivity again. We've come back. And they have forgotten about God. They forgot who their God was. And I think nowadays we are going through the same thing. Sometimes as believers, we go through trials. We go through temptations. We go through hard times. And we forget who our God is. We forget that He's right here. He's right beside us. He's walking through it with us. But we neglect to realize that He's always been there. But we live life as if He's not there at all. And that's what Isaiah is trying to remind them. He's not trying to be rude or arrogant or think that they are dumb people, but he's literally asking them these 4 questions. And they're questions of, it's like a rhetorical question. He knows that they already know who God is. Even if we look at the verse again, it says, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? Hath it not been told you from the beginning?" That means from a child you've heard about who God is. You know who God is. Right. Don't act like God isn't there and He's not doing anything for you. And he says, "Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth?" So Isaiah is really giving it to them. He's like, you guys know about God, but you're living your life as if God isn't there. Right. Stop doing that. He's saying, start living as if God is right beside you. He's right there, and He's never left you. So this evening, I want to talk to you about 3 characteristics of God, 3 powerful characteristics of God. And we're going to see the first characteristic from 22 to 25. Verse 22 says, "It is He that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the habitations therefore are as grasshoppers, that stretcheth out from the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in. That bringeth the princes to nothing. He maketh the judges of the earth as vanity. Yea, they shall not be planted. Yea, they shall not be sown. They shall not be sown. Yea, their stalk shall not take root in the earth. And He shall also blow upon them, and they shall wither. And the whirlwind shall take them away as stubble." And verse 25 says, "To whom then will you liken me? Or shall I be equal, saith the Holy One." So the first characteristic I want us to see is God is all-powerful. And in each one of those verses, you'll see that Isaiah is echoing to them, God is all-powerful. The first verse, it says that the Lord is sitting on the earth. He has the whole world in His hands. He has everything in control. He's like, God knows exactly where you are. He knows that you were in captivity. He brought you out of captivity. He brought you back to Israel so you could rebuild the temple, so you could worship Him. So He said, stop acting like God is not in control. But then it's amazing to see that He points out that the inhabitants of the earth are as grasshoppers. You see, we are nothing without God. To God, we are like grasshoppers. And again, Isaiah points out in a great picture, if you look at a grasshopper, it's nothing to God. He's saying God's all powerful. Stop trusting in yourself and start trusting in God. Then in verse 23, he gives another powerful picture. He says, He bringeth the princes to nothing, and He maketh the judges of the earth as vanity. And that's pretty much showing that He doesn't care if He's the most powerful ruler, if He's the most impressive ruler. He has all these kingdoms underneath his power. He's saying, hey, God has everything on him. God is so much more powerful than he is. Right. And you know, I woke up this morning feeling very happy. I wasn't feeling happy because of who's in the White House or who's the governor or who's the mayor. I woke up happy because I had heaven on my mind. And that's something that all of us should do, because one day we're going to be going to heaven and we're going to have the best king of all kings. I mean, we're not going to have elections. We're not going to have different presidents every 4 years. We're going to have one king. He's the King of kings and he's the Lord of lords. And that's what we should be rejoicing of. And that's what Isaiah is trying to remind these Israelites. Don't forget who God is. Just because you were in captivity and now you're back, God's still there. Remember that he's all powerful. Remember he's always been by your side. And verse 24 is just him going again saying, you will never prosper without God. You're in Israel now. He's brought you back there. Remember that he's with you. You will prosper if you stay with God. Remember he's all powerful. And verse 25 is just him again saying, don't compare God to all these other idols that you saw in Babylon or that you saw in Assyria or that you saw in Egypt. He said, remember that God is God. He's the one true and living God. Nobody is as powerful as he is. You see, I'm not standing up here to tell you that God is all powerful. I'm telling you, oh, you didn't know? The second characteristic is God is all-knowing. And we'll see in verse 26, it says, lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things, that bringeth out their host by number. He calleth them all by name, by the greatness of his might, for that he is strong in power, not one fainteth. Why sayest thou, O Jacob, and speakest, O Israel? Now, when Isaiah is saying these words, he's really speaking to Israel's heart. Because if you remember, Jacob is the man that Israel started from. Jacob and Esau, if you remember. Then Jacob grew up, he left, he got married, he came back, and he wrestled with God, and God changed his name to Israel. So God is really speaking to Israel when he says, O Jacob, and speakest, O Israel. My way is hid from the Lord, and my judgment is passed over from my God. God is trying to tell them, I know all things. I'm not hiding things from you. I know everything, but you have walked away from me. You have to remember that I know all things, and you need to come back to me. And that's what verse 26 is really trying to tell us. And Isaiah gives us another really great picture here. He says, lift up your eyes on high, and behold who hath created these things. And automatically when we look up in the sky in the evening, what do we see? We see the stars. And there are thousands and billions of stars over there. And I did a little bit of research because it really intrigued me when Isaiah said, lift up your eyes and just see the stars because God created them. And I read an article that scientists say that there's about 100 billion to 400 billion stars in the Milky Way. Now that's an estimated guess. But if you were to estimate that 100 billion stars were in each galaxy in the sky, there's a lot of galaxies that man has discovered. But if you were to calculate all the galaxies that man has discovered, and some they don't even know, you would have about 1 billion trillion stars. Now, that's just an estimate. There could be a lot more than that, but that's a lot of stars. And I don't have time to sit there and count all of them. I know that we probably couldn't even find all of them, but even if we had the best technology, even if we had a supercomputer that could count all those stars, it would take thousands of years to calculate all that. But can I tell you, my God knows each and every one of those stars by name. And that's what Isaiah is trying to point out to these Israelites. God knows everything. He knows all the stars by name. He's called them by name, created them. He said he knows everything that's going on in your life. He knows how many hairs are on your head. He knows all the trials you're going through. He knows every hardship you've passed by. He knows the highs and the lows in your life. Again, Isaiah is pointing out, Israel, don't forget that your God knows all things. And can I reiterate what Isaiah was saying? Children of God, don't forget that God knows all things. He knows everything that's going on in your life. There's nothing that's too hard for God, and there's nothing that's going to surprise God. So trust in Him. Remember that. Remember that He is all-knowing. The last characteristic we'll look at is God is always abiding. And we'll see that in the last few verses. Verse 28 says, "Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. There is no searching of His understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might He increaseth strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength, and they shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Verse 28 says that God fainteth not and is neither weary. That word abiding is such a powerful word because it means lasting a long time. It means enduring. It means God's never going to get tired. He's never going to faint. He's never going to get weary of taking care of you. He's always going to be there for you. And that's another thing Isaiah was pointing out to Israel. Don't forget that God is always abiding. He's always enduring. He's always lasting long. We might faint. We might get weary. Just like those later verses were saying that even the youths will faint. Even young people get tired. I mean, yesterday I went to Jekyll Island with my wife and we rode bikes for about 5 or 6 hours. And I can tell you when I got home, I was worn out. I just sat on the bed and took a long nap. And that's our fleshly bodies. We get faint, we get tired, we get weary, but God never does. He's always going to be there. He's going to be there right by our side, and He's always going to want to take care of us. God's never going to get tired. I mean, if we were comparing it to us, He could ride a bicycle forever and never get tired. He could run and never get tired. We do, but He doesn't. And that's why Isaiah is trying to remind Israel, don't forget that God is always abiding. Amen. I don't know about you, but I needed this reminder in my own life. And sometimes we often forget the things we already know. And the reason why I was asking you this question, oh, you didn't know, it wasn't to be funny or to be rude, but it was a question to really get you thinking. We know that God is all-powerful. We know that God knows all things. And we know that He's always with us. He's always abiding, but we often forget it. We often live our day-to-day life as if God is nowhere to be found. God doesn't know what I'm going through. He doesn't know the trials I'm going through. He doesn't know the loved ones I've lost, but God does. He knows every single one of the things that you're going through. And that's what Isaiah was truly trying to get the Israelites to remember. You might be back home. Your village might be pillaged. The temple might be destroyed. But start building it. Start trusting God. Start living your life again with God. Because they had walked away from Him. They believed in Him, but they started going different directions. And because of their sin against God, they were punished. But God never left them. He put them into captivity to get them to remember just how good of a God He was. And I want to remind you this evening, no matter what you're going through, no matter what happens here in America, God is still on the throne. He's still high and lifted up, and there's nothing that He can't do for us. But if we're running away from Him, and if we keep sinning against Him, He's not going to be there. He's not going to be standing next to you. He's going to be waiting for you to come back to Him. So don't be like the Israelites. Don't keep sinning against God, repenting, and having that cycle of just sinning, repenting, and turning back to God. But stay with God. Trust in Him. Realize that He is all-powerful. He's all-knowing, and He's always abiding. Let's pray. Dearly Father, we want to thank You so much for today. We thank You that You sent Your Son to come and die on the cross for us. We thank You for the freedom that we have to be able to read Your word. And I pray this evening that this message would truly be an encouragement to Your people, and that You would just continually put this in our heart and always help us to remember that You are all